Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th Z Jaipur Literature Festival's Charbagh. On the occasion of National Voters' Day, we are delighted to announce the launch of India Decides, The Great March of Democracy, edited by S.Y. Qureshi. As the world's largest democracy prepares for its 17th general election, political antennae are up to decrypt the mood of the voters. This session looks at the process behind India's vibrant electoral democracy and the challenge of conducting free and fair elections. Please join me in welcoming authors Orni Chani and Christophe Jaffalo, the editor S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner of India, in conversation with CNN India's Bureau Chief Nikhil Kumar. May I please request you to unveil the book on the left corner of the stage? Could also unveil the individual copies kept in front of you.
Hello and welcome, everyone. So congratulations, first of all, to S.Y. Qureshi on this book, which we've just launched. The conversation, as you know, is about elections and the Great March of Democracy, and we couldn't have asked for a better panel to talk us all through it. Let me start with you and your new book, and the process of putting on an election, which you have been part of as a former election official, top election official.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to mention that today is National Voters' Day. It was started in 2011 in a celebration of our young people. It was basically for the first-time voters who become 18 on the 1st of January. The idea for which was born in a civil society meeting in Bhubaneswar, where somebody said that 18 years is an age to celebrate. And I thought it was a very good statement, and we thought of a celebration. And we came up with what has turned out to be the biggest youth empowerment program of the world. Today, 8 lakh functions, 800,000 functions are being held all over the country, where the young voters will be given their voter ID card. And about 30 million of such people would get their voter card. So it's a very special day for me, and I had insisted that Penguin brings out this book today. And they really went out of the way to working on a war footing, and the book is out, and I'm so pleased. The idea for this book was born actually many years ago, when we were celebrating the 60 years of Diamond Jubilee of Election Commission of India in 2010 and 11. At that time, I wrote to about 30 people all around the world, experts on the subject, various universities abroad, to contribute an article. And about 13, 14 articles were received. But for some reason, the book could not be published because we had problem with the publisher, and then I moved on. And somehow, this is how bureaucracy works, unfortunately. But one interesting thing happened. When I thought of reviving the project and I wrote to 15 people only 5 months ago to contribute their articles, I had 100% response, which shows that former CEC perhaps has a better image and reputation than a serving CEC. I got 100% response. There were 2 regrets, but they were for very genuine reasons. Somebody was very ill, somebody had just got a new job, but all others. So now this is a book which is a combination of the old articles, updated, mind you. It was sent back to all of them, and they all updated there's articles and the new ones. And here it is, a range of perspectives from all over the world. It's interesting to see that India election has a lot of interest worldwide. We know that we are one of the largest democracies, but that is the biggest understatement. We are largest by miles. The second largest democracy is USA, which is 1/4 of India. We have 90 countries rolled into one in terms of voter numbers. And while we have 900 million voters to worry about, we also have a polling booth with a single polling station in Gir Forest of Gujarat, for whom a polling party of 6 goes the previous evening, sets up the polling station. We wait for him to come and vote. And he chooses. Last time he came around 2 o'clock, we waited. But even after he has voted, we do not pack up and go. Because theoretically, somebody may come and challenge his vote that he was a bogus voter, I'm the voter, so let me vote. So we wait till 5 o'clock. So that is the beauty of India, 900 million on one side, one voter on one side, and one vote. And if I may just finish on an anecdote which relates to Jaipur. When we were talking about the power of one vote, there was a leader in Rajasthan, Jaipur, and Mr. C.P. Joshi. He was the president of the Congress party. He would probably been the chief minister if he had won. He lost by one vote. And when he was losing, he rang up the returning officer requesting for a recount of the machine of the postal ballot. There are 550 postal ballots, 15, 20 minutes, same result. His second call, can you retabulate the totals from the machine? Same result. And third phone call was to thank the returning officer for obliging. The interesting story here was that his wife had not voted. Now, I called him up and I asked him whether it was true, because it was an interesting story. He said, yes, it's true that because on the poll day, his wife and daughter had gone to some temple which far away, and they could not come and vote. So for us, there are 3 lessons here. One, that every vote counts. 2, you cannot take even your family for granted. 3, on the day of poll, the most important temple is the polling station.
That's a fantastic introduction about the scale and the reach and just how complex the process is. But this wasn't a given, right, Ornit? It wasn't a given that it would be a universal franchise. And everyone was saying that, in fact, it would be impossible to do so when India was about to have its first elections. Tell us about that process.
So indeed, you spoke about the voters, the number of voters, the scale, and an electoral roll accurate and as updated as humanly possible is the plinth upon which an electoral system can stand and work. And the idea, the notion of creating the first electoral roll, the first voters list on the basis of adult franchise was not a given at all. So if we go back to the times of colonial rule, yes, there were elections under colonialism, but the British continuously argued that universal franchise is a bad fit for India. And then towards the run-up for the 1935 Government of India Act, the constitutional reforms, they said that even if we would have wanted to give universal franchise, it would be impracticable and impossible at present, bureaucratically, administratively. Beyond that, the franchise under colonial rule was very narrow. About 5% of the population had the right to vote, just about 30 million people. There were qualifications. You had to pay taxes, have property, gender, education, a very narrow franchise. And what is happening with independence, and of course there were separate voters lists. There was separate list of voters for Muslims, for Sikhs, for Hindus. In April 1947, before partition, the Constituent Assembly of India adopts the principle of universal franchise. But of course, there's a huge gap to bridge between a principle, an ideal, as good as and wonderful as it is, and the ability to put it into practice. And the bureaucrats at the Secretariat of the Constituent Assembly, a little bit after this decision is taken place by the Assembly, realized that the job, in their words, is going to be colossal. And we better start preparing the voters list if we want to have general elections on the basis of adult suffrage as soon as the Constitution comes into force. And from September 1947, this is in the midst of the partition of India and Pakistan, when there are like millions of people across the borders, around 18 million refugees across the country, at a time of great violence, at a time when still 552 princely states have yet to integrate into India, they start this first all-India mega project of preparing the first electoral roll on the basis of universal adult suffrage. And it wasn't obvious because at the time, beyond the circumstances I described, 85% of the population was illiterate. 85% of the population never voted before to a representative in a legislative body. 50% of that prospective electorate were women who did not even recognize themselves as individuals, but as wife of, daughter of, widow of, etc. Indians had to be individualized to become voters. And in my book, indeed, I tell the hitherto untold story of how bureaucrats did it, how they, think about the fact, for example, it took them 4 months to even devise or think about the design of the instructions of how to do that under the circumstances. And the beautiful thing is that they're not doing it by coming up with ideas that they looked at the West or their own thoughts. They do it in consultation by consulting bureaucrats at the local level across India. They're getting feedback from administrators in the princely states, in the provinces, and on that basis, they devise the instructions. In fact, the instructions ultimately are based largely on ideas from the Travancore state that at the time had its own first elections on universal franchise for a very, very narrow, small electorate. The more exciting, I think, or striking thing about the story of making the first list of voters is the way people ultimately drove this process, the way people, particularly partition refugees in the very immediate, understood very quickly that a place on the electoral roll is in fact their way of having a stake in the new state. At the time when who is an Indian was unclear, this was a way of getting your place in the state or to get your title deed to democracy. So the success of making the first voters list largely was driven by the way people fought for a place on the roll and their ongoing interactions with bureaucrats across the country to make it successful. Now, of course, having this list and doing it properly in a way that people would trust it, people would know that it was done properly, they have a place on the roll, is the basis for trust in the electoral process and for having a robust electoral system. But this doesn't secure democracy. But without having that robust institution, that couldn't have what Qureshi was sharing with us would not have happened in the first place.
Which is the perfect segue to you, Christoph, whose latest book is about business and politics in this country. And so it's and so that brings us to this question of beyond the process. What else do you need to secure democracy, to consolidate it, to make sure that people trust it, it's reliable?
Indeed, democracy is never given forever. It's a fragile regime, and across the world we see many challenges coming up. It's true in Europe, it's true in the US, it's true here. One of these challenges is, of course, majoritarianism. Another one is money in politics. And in this book that we have just published, in fact, I saw it for the first time this morning, so it's really a fresh book, that we did with a team of colleagues based in the US, Atul Kohli, the co-editor, based in Canada, Kanta Murali, and based in India, of course. We try to identify 3 questions, and I'll be very brief on the number 2 and number 3, but I will try in a couple of minutes to say something more on what is the challenge emerging from the osmosis between business milieus and politicians in India today. What we see after now many decades of liberalization is that this process has not resulted in a market-friendly economy. It has resulted in a business-friendly economy. And that meant two things. Many politicians are now businessmen. Many businessmen are now politicians. When politicians become businessmen, they have their own private hospitals, private schools, private security companies, and that's not good for democracy, because then why should they pay attention to public hospitals, to public schools, and to police? When businessmen become politicians, they become MPs. In the Lok Sabha, we have interesting figures in Asima Sinha's chapter. The percentage of businessmen has risen from 14 to 26% in 15 years. Interestingly, the largest number of businessmen today in the Lok Sabha are on the BJP side, 86 out of 144. What does that mean? It means that they will be part of parliamentary committees. The very committees who will be shaping the laws, regulating their business, will have them on board. So civil aviation, and you'll find the names yourself, huh? Civil aviation, electricity, telecom, all these standing committees, finance, all these standing committees have had businessmen right in the middle, shaping the laws, regulating their business. Secondly, you have regulators, many regulators, dealing with the same issues. India is one of the few countries in the world where the regulators have accommodated businessmen who will regulate their own business themselves. So the conflict of interest is massive. That's a major, major issue. I'll be very brief on the two other points. Number two, to contest elections is very costly. You know, you don't win an election, you don't win a Lok Sabha seat with one. 20 lakhs?
70 lakhs is the current.
Yes, this is the official limit. But if you go by the practice, you have to spend much more, maybe 10 crores or something like that. How do you get the money for that? Businessmen. And it's very interesting to see how the cycle is processed. Businessmen need politicians, for instance, to get loans from public banks. Who can twist the arm of a bank director? The person who has appointed him, the politician. And the NAP, the non-performing assets, NPA, sorry, the non-performing assets story arcs back to this other conflict of interest. The investment schemes were not that great, but the bank director had to give the money. And then the whole chain of SMEs, MSMEs are striving for credit, but there is not credit left because you have NPAs in each bank. Third and last, who owns the media is the last question we ask in this book, and Raman already has a fascinating chapter on who is owning the media. And that was news to me. It is so opaque. So many people just don't know that so many business houses have so many TV channels, newspapers at their disposal. Well, this is also not terribly good for democracy when you need an independent media, an unbiased media, to make sure that there is no disinformation, but information. And we have now an interesting situation when you have to go online for getting real information because all the others have their hands tied, and that's not very good for democracy either.
So then how does, given all these conflicts that infect politics, how does the Election Commission, which has a reputation for being independent, how do you go about it? Tell us, for example, what might be happening now. We're working up to a general election.
First of all, I would like to suggest that he renames his book instead of Business and Politics. So politics as a business in India, that will be perhaps more appropriate. It's very true. When I took over as CEC, I had given myself two challenges: voter apathy and money power. I'm very happy to say that voter apathy was dealt with effectively. We set up a voter education division. We started the National Voters' Day. And since 2010, all elections have given us historic turnouts. There used to be a demand that there should be compulsory voting, which we opposed, because compulsion and democracy don't go together. Your right to vote includes your right not to vote. And we said, instead of achieving something with a danda, if we can do it by love and PR, by persuasion and education, we should do that. And that is the reason highest ever turnout is happening over the years. The second issue was about money power. We set up another division called Expenditure Monitoring Division, where we brought in a commissioner from the Central Board of Direct Taxes, an income tax commissioner, set up new rules. We started seizing money. Till today, about 2,000 crores would have been seized. But and in my book, my earlier book, which has come out last week as a 5th edition, An Undocumented Wonder, The Making of the Great Indian Election, I have listed 40 modus operandi of cheating. In fact, when I was writing the book, I thought I should give it the heading 40 ways to cheat. But I thought I will be pilloried, so I said 40 ways to stop cheating.
Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. So now, the way they use money power ingeniously, the money goes in ambulances, how to catch an ambulance. We said, all right, chase the ambulance right up to the hospital. When the patient has been taken out, then raid it. We saw a bogus wedding party of 4,000 people, chicken flying, liquor flowing, and our observer just walked in, and he found that this was a fake wedding party. There was no bride or bridegroom. But if politicians are cleverer, their new modus operandi would be, there will still be a bogus wedding, but this time there will be a rented bridegroom and a rented bride with a printed wedding card as a proof that this is a genuine wedding. So we are dealing with all this, and I'm very sorry to admit that this perhaps is the only unsolved problem, because the politicians are wiser. The money now reaches the destination before election commission comes into play. We come into play only when we announce the election schedule and the model code kicks in. Before that, we are helpless. We see it happening, we can't do anything, and money has reached villages, and when there is no physical transaction, what will we catch? So, but we are after it, and we need citizens' cooperation. They should refuse to be seduced. They should refuse the bribe which is being offered, saris and dhotis and gold or whatever which is slipped under the window or the money. There was a time when, about 500 rupees or 1,000 rupees will fall out of your newspaper. Now people who used to buy one newspaper started buying 4 newspapers. So the response has to come from you that you will not accept these bribes, and even if somehow they push it down your door, you vote according to your conscience, vote for good candidates.
So, Arnett, you spoke about the putting together of the list earlier. And you just mentioned you're working on the history of the first election. To what extent were some of these issues anticipated by the framers at the beginning? Did they think much about them?
So, can I just say something before relating to the next project of the first elections, which is at its embryonic phases? I just want to make a comment that these were extremely important issues that were raised by both Christoph and Qureshi. But I just want to warn about, this is the stuff that also sometimes makes us become a bit cynical about democratic politics. And if the history that I did on the preparation of the first electoral roll taught me something, is about, in fact, how precious it is to have an electoral system and procedures that are in place. Because the point that you made, Qureshi, about every vote count is something that I just want to unpack for a second. When at independence, Indian bureaucrats made an accurate first list of voters, what it actually did, it bureaucratized, it operationalized the notion of procedural equality, the notion of one woman, one man, one vote. And this is exactly at the basis of every vote counts. And this is about the real ability, not in any cynical form, precisely because in India, as you told us, one vote counts. This is why, in fact, the electoral system is so precious, and people should be, as you suggest, really vigilant about the system and about the vote, and realize that actually there is a system that enables in a real way a change. punishing a bad government or a hope for a better one. Think about what happened in India on the 11th of December with election results that, people made a different decision that they made earlier. About, what's happening with the first elections, huge efforts were put into, so this is my next project. It's a sequel to How India Became Democratic, and it's a history of the first elections that actually takes place, the constitution comes into force in January 1950, but the first general elections takes place between October 1951 to February 1952, a little later. So a lot of emphasis is put on the procedures that would, for example, make sure that there'll be a secrecy of the vote, or that people would feel really free to cast their vote. So whether at the time it was special arrangements for the voting of women, or even the ballot boxes, right? There was huge effort into how to ensure that people would trust the fact that wherever they put the ballot paper, the ballot box would be safe enough, that indeed no one would know whom they voted to, etc. So these procedures, innovative things that the Election Commission of India is doing, or the stuff that started under Qureshi with voters' education, apathy, and money, to try and deal with money, which the limits, as you also indicated, Christoph, is because of the lack of laws. I mean, there's a limit to the power that the Election Commission has to deal with that, started already at the time. And I think what we see today with the Election Commission is a continuation of what was happening then in terms of trying to put the procedures in place. Yes, we have, for the first election, the whole thing of tickets distribution, the use of the media. There were huge limits at the time on the use of the media. Just as one example, the parties were not allowed to use All India Radio. So that was something they couldn't do. So there were all kinds of restrictions at the time that it's very difficult to think about those at the present, where, we live in the age of social media, etc. But as far as the procedures are concerned, huge amount of efforts were put into ensuring that the integrity of the vote.
May I respond to your question? Could they anticipate? I think it was very difficult for them to anticipate, simply because at that time we had this license Raj kind of system. The state-owned economy was such that you did not have the strong capitalist that you are seeing now in the fray. It's very interesting to look, for instance, at one single figure. Till 1995, the gross capital formation represented 10% of the GDP on the private side and the public side. Same. Today, this gross capital formation, which is really what measures the strength of the private sector, is 25%, and the public sector is down to 8%. We've seen something they could not anticipate: the making of a capitalist class of a global reach. When yesterday we learned that 9 family houses in India have a revenue and assets as large as 50% of the other Indians. 9 families, 600 million people. That's a new world. Few people, a handful of people, have acquired a colossal influence. They could not, I think, visualize that. They could visualize briefcase politics, what Kochanek has studied in the 60s. Briefcase, no, there is no briefcase yet, still. Briefcase is something of the past. You could bribe for getting some more imports in the context of the license Raj, some more investment in that context, but today it's a different game.
So you talked earlier a little bit about how you, when you're running the process, you manage that. I'm curious about what you did to make sure that voter apathy was dealt with. What exactly did you do?
What did we do? Well, we started voter education programs, all possible things, all possible media, and we asked all the district administration right down to the subdivisional level to come up with different ways. For instance, in one case in Barabanki, there was a 118 kilometers long human chain for the voter awareness, so people are curious what's happening. In Bulandshahr, in one stadium, Women did rangoli. The entire stadium was decorated with rangoli, themes from independence, from the independent India and others. So we involved the school children. We told the school children that your parents sit in their drawing rooms and criticize the politicians. Some neta chor hai, all politicians are thieves. Now this is wrong. If you haven't bothered to go and vote, you have no business to criticize the government. So please make sure that your parents go and vote. And they did. And the enterprising teachers gave them extra extra marks if they bring a certificate that yes, my parents were forced to go and they vote. And now when the children become conscious, tomorrow they themselves are going to be the voters, then young people, and it created so much of enthusiasm that one barber said that anybody who shows his finger with the marking here will get a free haircut. So 10%, 20% discount by the private restaurant. You know, that it became such a public movement, and people took pride in the fact that this is a festival which they should enjoy and they should come out and vote. It has been a great success story, and if you Google Voters Day and voter education, you will find lots of interesting things happening. But when we're talking about business and politics, that has been one of our worries. We have been worried about crony capitalism. And in that context, there was a very unfortunate development in the last budget. In the speech of the finance minister, he started very promisingly. He said, for the last 70 years, we have been trying to control money power in elections, and we have failed. And without transparency of political funding, a free and fair election is not possible. So we expected the third sentence to be something positive. And what he did was, whatever transparency exists was removed, electoral bonds were introduced. Earlier, any donation of 20,000 was reported to the Election Commission. Now, crores of rupees will change hands through electoral bonds, all anonymous. And the reason given that the donor wants privacy. Now, donor wants secrecy because he wants to protect quid pro quo. If he gives crores, there is no free lunch. He wants some license, some contract, some favor. And that is what they wanted to be secret, and the government very happily obliged them. And second and more dangerous, there used to be a cap on companies' donation to political parties of 7.5%, which means you could not donate more than 7.5% of your 3 years' profit to a political party. That cap has been removed altogether, which means the companies can now exist to run political parties. And so much for transparency that we were talking about, and which is why his book is going to be very relevant. It will do very well. It will sell many editions.
Christoph, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, the recent measures? You're nodding your head.
Certainly.
Throughout.
But I started by saying every democracy is facing the same kind of challenge. India is emulating what the US have recently done. This is exactly what they have done. And the Supreme Court of America has made this amazing decision to let money rules democracy. So that's why only citizens and institutions can contain this trend. Among the institutions, clearly the Election Commission of India is the most effective and has to be the most effective. It is the most important one. And hopefully it will remain independent and can stand on its feet. In this book that Qureshi has edited, I have a chapter on T.N. Seshan, and you may remember when T.N. Seshan started to say what he said, he was very much criticized, and retrospectively, we are so happy that he did what he did. There is another institution that has not been mentioned so far, and that is very low-key, but the CAG. Try to read the reports of the CAG. They are very difficult to find. They don't publicize anything. But this is a gold mine. And if you want to know what happens really in terms of the norms regarding environment, when industrialists are given a free hand, when you want to know what is the price they have paid the land, tax deduction, everything is there. This is the other side of crony capitalism. So many things in return. the politician has to pay back.
Ornit, you have an anecdote that
Yeah, so-
exemplifies the
no, it's
importance
just-
of the Election Commission.
I mean, the process that you talk about capitalism, the economy, and its effects on politics and on democracy, as you say, one of our savers is to have a strong election commission. And it wasn't obvious at all that India would have a strong election commission. And here I think that the roots in history of this is actually, important to know. So, the original article, the draft article for the direction supervision of election in the 1948 draft constitution said that every state of the union would have its own independent election commission to run its own election, like in the US. But what is happening during the process of the preparation of the first roll between 1948 to 1949, they see that there are lots of attempts at the local level to disenfranchise people, to disenfranchise Dalits and refugees and people whom some bureaucrats thought should not be on the electoral roll. And when they realized that, the bureaucrats at the Secretariat of the Constituent Assembly write a note to the drafting committee in May 1949 to say, this is what is happening, and therefore we think that we need a central, autonomous election commission that would manage and direct elections from the center. And Ambedkar comes to the House to present the article on elections in the Constitution, and he says to the members of the Assembly, what I'm presenting to you is a radical change in the original article, and this is the reason we're doing it. We don't want anyone anywhere in India to be subjected to the whim of a local administrator for being or not being on the electoral roll. So ultimately, a strong, independent, autonomous election commission, which, by the way, in India, when we talk about separation of power, right, we talk about the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. In India, we have like a fourth leg in this separation of authorities, and the fourth one is the election commission. You know more than us about how in the time of election, it has even judicial power. The roots of that is in the experience of preparing the first roll of voters and how important it is today, because as you say, this is the anchor for still, saving the process sometimes from money, even though it's a huge challenge. And I think that the other thing is that this new book, right, the Great March of Democracy, one of the amazing things about the book and the way you collated and the different articles here, Qureshi, is it gives us a little bit the story of the evolution, right? It's not that everything was put in place at independence or immediately thereafter, but the story of making this great march of democracy is how the Election Commission over time created new innovations and ways of dealing, like cat and mouse, right? Always politicians come with a new thing, with a new way of, let's have weddings to get voters to, what you told us about. So every time there's a new way of doing things, of subverting process, and the Election Commission is always trying to catch up with that. And some of the story of catching up is in fact here.
Yeah, I would like to mention that I have dedicated this book to three. One, the founding fathers of the Constitution, who created this beautiful institution with their foresight. Interestingly, when there was a debate who should be conducting the state elections, Vidhan Sabha elections, legitimately it should have been done, given to the states. They said if we give it to the state, there will never be a perfect electoral roll. Outsiders from that state will never be enrolled. It will always be Assam for Assamese, Bengal for Bengalis, and Tamil Nadu for Tamil. So therefore, let there be a central commission. What a far-sighted thing, and we see that happening all the time. Now, the first dedication is to the founding fathers of the Constitution, who laid the foundation of the most powerful election commission in the world. Second is to Mr. T.N. Session, who is the 10th CEC, who made the election commission visible. That was the time when it was not being taken very seriously, and he really turned it around. And third dedication, actually the second was to Mr. Sukumar Sen, the first CEC and ICS officer, actually who is an unsung hero. He is the real hero of election. He laid the foundation of India's electoral system. There was no staff, no experience, and no the previous history to fall back on, and he created great structures out of nothing. And the election which he conducted in 1951 and 52 was the biggest election in world history, and that deserves to be celebrated. So he is also a dedication. And I must say, India's election history starts with Mr. Sukumar Sen, however little may have been written on it, but she had taken it 2 years even further back. Even before the election, how the electoral rolls were created by the bureaucracy. The much maligned bureaucracy, the Babudam, we are all called Babus. Do you know 11 million people who conduct the elections for us, they're all Babus, they're all government servants. But once they come under the election commission, they deliver a zero-error election every year, because that shows they are basically competent. We have to give them the environment to function independently without interference, and they deliver.
And just, sorry, go ahead.
Just a footnote to what you have said, Ornit and Mr. Qureshi, regarding Ambedkar. And Ornit, you use the word innovation. You know, Ambedkar has been criticized because it was said that he imitated the West. You know, he had read all the constitutions of the West, and one of the critiques was, that's an Indian. Well, he innovated. And the Election Commission of India is not something you will find elsewhere. It's an export product. People are imitating the Election Commission of India. And this is the legacy of Ambedkar, and since my biography of Ambedkar in India has just been out, I can't help but mentioning it.
So, you know, just to add to that, in fact, when, you know, I told you that on the basis of what is happening when they prepare the electoral rolls before the Constitution, and they realized that an independent election commission for every state would be a bad idea, Rajendra Prasad, who was at the time the president of the Constituent Assembly of India, asked them to look at what's happening in the world. How do they conduct elections across the world, and write a report of, you know, what's happening around the world. Maybe we can learn from something. And they look at what's happening, and these administrators at the Secretariat, they're harshly critical about the management of elections in the US and in the UK. They do kind of compliment and take some ideas from Canada and from Australia, but ultimately they devise their own way of having an independent commission. And just taking on Sukumar Sen, who indeed, you know, did this colossal thing of the largest elections ever at that point, and also wrote a fantastic report on the first elections, and then proceeded later to help conducting elections in 1953, I think, in Sudan. So, you know, Sukumar Sen gets the files that I worked with, the files of these administrators who did the electoral roll. And in fact, the last undersecretary of the Secretariat of the Constituent Assembly, S.N. Subramaniam, he becomes the first secretary of the Election Commission of India, and he brings with him this continuity of the preparations that were done ahead of the establishment of the Election Commission only in March 1950. So just to give place to these people as well.
Which is a great note to open it up to questions. Lots of questions. Right. I think we have, where are the mics? They're around? Yeah? Why don't we start at the back somewhere? And then we'll work our way to the front.
Where are the mics?
They're coming.
Oh, there they are. Yeah.
There they are.
Hello. My question to Dr. Qureshi, I would ask you just one simple question. If you were made the Chief Election Commissioner again, what was that one thing which you would now like to do to improve this? And nothing has been mentioned about caste and creeds, which are very, very prominent in casting your vote.
I think I had a very good tenure, and I would not like to have another innings because I won't be able to replicate what I did last time. Things have become bad to us, but we are constantly evolving. I would rather mention something which I did against all odds and full-fledged hostility from powerful people. I wanted to set up a training institute India International Institute of Democracy and Election Management, which was opposed tooth and nail by the government. We went ahead, they cleared the top floor of the commission, set up the institute, and I'm very happy to tell you in 5 years, 84 countries have trained from us, which is what Ornit was referring to. People want to learn from our experience, and here we have this opportunity to educate the world by just experience sharing.
Hey everyone. Actually, I have 3 questions. One for each one.
Can we stick to one? Let's just stick to one.
Okay. So, Ornit, in your book, you discussed that 85% of Indians were uneducated in the first general election. And also, women used to think themselves as the second to their husbands or fathers or everyone. So, does not bring that questions on the legitimacy of the first general elections, that the people that were represented wouldn't have been same if it would have in today in like present context?
Maybe I can.
Do you,
No, I'm happy to answer, but the question was whether it was legitimate because they were.
he's saying that, yeah, you were talking about the roles.
Yeah, but was it legitimate because they were? You know, I don't think that anyone had, I mean, some people raised doubts at the time when the roles were coming to completion, the draft roles were coming to completion. Some people, among them even the president of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad, expressed doubts about giving suddenly the right to vote to people who are illiterate, and are we giving this power to illiterate people? But I think over time, if we look at, you know, at the results, at the consequences over time, in fact, poor and illiterate people do vote intelligently, and they, you know, they know what they're doing. You don't have to be necessarily literate, know how to read and write, in order to know what is good for you, what are your interests, etc. And you know, the other side of it is, and just about women, the efforts were to actually register women ultimately in their own names, right? So that was part of the process. And the thing that had to be done at the time was to really educate the voters into explaining, making sure people know what the procedures are. It wasn't called voters' education, but echoing what you were describing to us about your own innovations as Chief Election Commissioner at the time, there were huge efforts through the film division of India that produced incredible films that were screened in villages about the process of how to vote, radio programs, conducting mock elections across the country. So
If I can add to that, you know, when India adopted the universal franchise, the Western world was quite surprised. And that they thought we have gone mad. With 84% illiteracy, poverty, socially divided country, 565 princely states, they thought democracy will collapse and it will be a bad experiment. But very first election, we proved them wrong. Same women. Now, also, universal franchise is an important statement. Do you know how many years it took the greatest democracy in the world, America, to give voting rights to women? 144 years. How long did it take the modern the democracy in the world, the UK? 100 years. And here was this poor country which gave universal voting rights from day one, and it has succeeded, and we have never looked back.
just to add, in France, women got the vote in 1946, a year before Indian women got the vote. In Switzerland, in some cantons, in 1974, so anyway, in the 70s. So it's an amazing achievement.
The lady in the fourth row.
Hello. So my question is directed to any of the panelists who wish to take it up. I recently read about this process of manipulating the delimitations of political constituencies to favor a particular political party. I think it's called gerrymandering, if I'm not wrong. Can you shed some light on how this works in India? I heard of it in Puducherry and also in Gujarat, I think. So what measures are being taken to actually combat this? And where does it begin? So if the delimitations are being manipulated, there is some manipulation happening from the top. So
Yeah.
that is outside the political parties as well. So I would like
Yeah.
to have some.
May I?
Thank you.
You know, gerrymandering is one word which is very little known in India, fortunately. In many countries, that's the everyday discourse. In India, this process is very transparent. There is a delimitation commission which is headed by a Supreme Court retired judge. And it has one of the three commissioners as a member, a state election commission is a member. They do public hearing, and after that they notify the new delimitation. It has worked very well, but there have been instances when, for instance, in the Sachar Commission, it was mentioned that some Muslim-dominated constituencies were notified as scheduled caste constituencies, and since Muslim cannot be a scheduled caste, therefore they were taken out. I think this can be handled because, fortunately, unlike the scheduled tribe, which is a mathematical thing, suppose there are two districts, two constituencies which are reserved for the scheduled tribe. The top two scheduled tribe population will be automatically taken as reserved. For scheduled caste constituencies, there is a flexibility available to the delimitation commission. So if a constituency, say Muslim-dominated constituency, is being affected, it can easily be taken to a neighboring constituency or something else. So, but this criticism also is not acceptable. This should be handled in the next delimitation commission, hopefully.
Christoph, did you want to add something? No? Can we move to this side? Which
Is it working? Okay, sir, this question is to Mr. Christoph. So we have been talking, in your book you stated that the people who are in the standing committees for the commercial policies are the businessmen themselves. So isn't that the basics of democracy, that the stakeholders are the ones that are making the policies? If we want the law minister to be a lawyer, shouldn't we want the people who are making the commercial policies to be businessmen themselves?
Well, in a democracy, the supreme value is the public interest, not the private interest. So you need to be in a position not to let private interest interfere with the rules and regulation that all the public will be affected by. This is a very simple code of conduct, by the way. No conflict of interest. And the state has to be above socio-economic groups. It has to be neutral, it has to be somewhat unbiased. Just a footnote to this question of education and democracy, because we saw recently, not so long ago, some states making it impossible for some candidates to local elections who had not the minimum degrees to contest. And this state was one of them.
If I can answer in a lighter vein, then who should be the Minister for Child Development? A child? And who should be the Minister for Animal Husbandry?
the lady right at the back, there, yes. In the red, yes. Yeah.
My question is to Dr. Qureshi. There are a lot of aspersions being cast on the EVM machines at this point in time. What is your view on political parties demanding that we should go back to postal ballots?
Ballot paper, not postal ballot. Yes, I would strongly recommend that you read my article in Indian Express yesterday, but I will briefly recapitulate. Ever since EVMs were introduced, every political party at some point or the other has questioned. In fact, I have recounted in 2010, BJP wrote a book against the EVMs, and as a result, similar hue and cry happened, and we called an all-party meeting, and in that all-party meeting, the VVPAT was born. I was the CEC when there was a consensus, look, if you start the VVPAT, we will be okay with the machine. He said, all right, let us start the VVPAT. We asked the two factories to start manufacturing. We asked our 5 IIT professors, independent committee to supervise the whole process. And 2012, we did full-fledged, full-day test on these machines in 5 different climatic zones, including one in Jaisalmer, heat and humidity of Jaisalmer of July. Cherrapunji, the most the rainy area, Trivandrum, the coastal area, Leh, the mountain, and Delhi. And we repeated it a year later, and since then we have been using the machine. After the introduction of VVPAT, this controversy should have died down. Now, in the last 3 years, 4 years, out of 10 state elections, 1,500 machines, there were the chits from the voter slip which was generated, they were counted, 1,500. Each one of them tallied with the machine, not one mismatch. I think that focus and debate should entirely be on the counting of these slips. Election Commission says only one slip per constituency, which means 1 out of 300 booths will be counted. I personally feel that is not adequate. It should be at least 5% or whatever. I was told by the then CEC 3 months ago that they have written to Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta, to let them know the most scientific sample size, which will lead to 99.99% satisfaction. I think that's the most reasonable thing. Let us see what the advice has come, and VVPAT is the answer, and that should settle the debate.
On the left-hand side there, yes.
Hello, sir. On a lighter note, I'd like to know what is your take what is your take on singing of the national anthem before the movies with regard to democracy?
Yours.
Well, so long as this anthem is shared by everybody and recognized by everybody as being the national anthem, that's a sign and a symbol of patriotism. Now, of course, this is something that is somewhat interpreted as a way to impose some conception of the nation over others. But this is precisely why there should be a debate on what is the national anthem of India. You know, election commission, election campaigns at large, should deal with issues, and debates on TV or elsewhere should make the citizens in a position to see who thinks what. On the contrary, you are bombarded with one-way traffic kind of information or disinformation, and where is the debate? This is one issue. Another one is, of course, the tax problems. Nobody speaks about the taxation problem. I was mentioning the number of people who are earning now billions of dollars. Who asked for a real tax reform in this country? Where is the debate on that? I'm not going to give the program of the parties, but clearly these are the issues we should see more.
Okay, last question from the front. Yeah. Just behind you.
Hello, sir. What are your views on one nation, one election policy?
You know, the good idea in principle, but there is no straight answer because there are pros and cons of everything. There are 3 tiers of election: Panchayati Raj, Vidhan Sabha and Lok Sabha. Initially, the suggestion was that all 3 elections should be held together. As far as the Election Commission is concerned, that's the best thing for us because voter is the same, polling booth is the same, the election machinery is the same, security apparatus is the same. You go and you vote for 3. We will come and supervise the election and play golf for the next 5 years. It will be very easy for us. But it's not as simple as that. Now, suppose we have a simultaneous election scenario and the Lok Sabha falls for some reason, and as it did in Mr. Vajpayee's time, in 13 days. Now, there have to be re-elections in Lok Sabha. What about the 28 Vidhan Sabhas which have come with absolute majority? Why should they suffer? Because something happened in Lok Sabha. So it is not practical, which is why the Prime Minister did not thrust it down the nation's throat. He said, let there be a national debate. And the debate has been going on because there are practical difficulties, constitutional issues, and we cannot even subjugate even Panchayat election. Your right to vote for your Sarpanch and Panch is as important as for voting for your MP. In fact, sometimes when you mix up the 3 elections, the issues also get mixed up. For national election, you have foreign policy, you have bigger national issues. When you're electing your Panch, you are bothered about the Nali in front of your house and the dispensary and Anganwadi. So why should the issues get mixed up? No simple answer. Therefore, let there be a debate. If consensus emerges, well and good. If it doesn't, even better.
You want to talk?
Yes, I see another problem with one nation, one election. That may affect Indian federalism. Suppose you have at the center, just suppose, a strong man who can create a wave in such a way that at the state level, the MPs, the candidates for Lok Sabha, have somewhat to pay allegiance to him or are even nominated by him. The chief minister that will come from these elections will also be a creature of the strong man at the center. There is a wave, it sweeps the polls. India is in one color only, with people paying allegiance to him in the states. Where is federalism in this context? And it is a very important point because the checks and balances in India, of course, have to do with other institutions. It has much to do with federalism, the states. This is where democracy is the most vibrant. People know the name of their chief minister. Well, they used to know the name of the chief minister. They don't necessarily know the name of the prime minister.
Great. Well, on that note, it's exactly 0000, so we're finished. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to all the panelists for fantastic views.
We wish to thank our speakers, Christophe Jaffrellet, Ornit Shani, S.Y. Qureshi, and Nikhil.